Carlo, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yes, of course. So, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to your show. Um, Let me tell you something about myself. First of all, I wanted to say I'm a native Italian. I was born and raised in Italy. I moved to the United States some time ago, and I became a professional philosopher. Now, currently, I teach at the City University of New York, also known as CUNY. And I also teach at other institutions, St. John's College, St. John's University, sorry, St. Joseph's University, and the Fashion Institute of Technology. I live in New York and I teach in New York. I would say that my main areas of expertise are primarily ethics, ethics and meta ethics. But I also teach regularly courses in logic and philosophy of religion, of course.
Perfect. So the topic today was reasons to believe in a deistic God. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there are? Because I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe that naturalism best explains everything about the universe. So could you tell me some of the reasons you think indicate deism over naturalism?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to make a premise that I don't have 100% certainty of what I'm saying. No, nobody has. I'm sure you're not as confident as saying that you're an atheist, that you believe that there is no God with 100% certainty. No one is.
Yeah, I'm
That's
a fallibilist. Knowledge doesn't require 100% certainty. Totally agree.
great. Now, my story is the following. I never cared really about religion for a number of years, and I still don't, by the way, because I'm not a religious person. I always found it not very interesting. I tried. I couldn't bring myself to believe in a theistic God. And then over a number of years, studying all the arguments, reading some science, I came to the conclusion that the best explanation for a number of things, um, whether it's consciousness, the existence of morality, the fine tuning of the universe, all sorts of things that you hear in all debates. You are in your channel. I'm sure you've had many of these debates, the same questions, the same things over and over. So you know what I'm going to say. I know what you're going to respond. I've taught these things at university a million times. And upon reflection of the evidence, especially scientific evidence, I came to the conclusion that the most plausible explanation is that there exists a creator of the universe. Now, for a variety of reasons that we can discuss, I wrote a book about it. I wrote several papers on this topic. I find it more plausible than not that this creator of the universe, as I call it, is an intelligent being that we might call God. I don't care what we call it. We may call it nature. You can call it God, whatever you want. But I want to specify. I want to clarify that I am not a pantheist. Okay, I'm not a Spinozian. I don't think that God and nature are the same thing. I really believe that God is an independent, intelligent, transcendent being that created the universe, that created pretty much everything that we are here to discuss. Um, I'm open. I've been open to evidence, to anything, to show me the opposite, to prove the opposite. My problem with atheism is that all the arguments for atheism are, to me, either weak or fallacious, and so here we are. I I believe that there's a God.
Okay. You mentioned the fine tuning argument. I really like that one.
I know you
I think
do.
it's so. What about the fine tuning do you think indicates intelligence of any kind? Because I think I understand there is fine tuning. I agree, but I don't think fine tuning is in any way indicative of an intelligence as opposed to any of the other options.
What do you think is evidence of?
Well, the fine tuning could be explained by chance or necessity. I think those are the only two options. I think design is a kind of necessity. But the best explanation seems to be that there is an undiscovered law of physics that interconnects all of the other laws and makes them determined to have the relationships that they have. And that seems to be a better explanation than an intelligence.
But you see, the problem when you say that there was a law, if I understood your argument, when you say that there was a law, maybe I don't know if it's the best way to put it, but a law implies some sort of a organization, at least, some, and to me it indicates some sort of intelligence. I highly doubt that. I mean, look, maybe one day we all die and we get to an atheist paradise, or there's nothing at all, and we all find the truth, and you say, well, now we have to deal with it. It was just a coincidence. I just highly doubt that a law out of nothing exists such that it is capable of organizing the universe precisely. I mean, you know what the fine tuning is. We don't have time, yes, because we would be talking about that for 3 hours. But
Well, yeah,
the
so I just the fine
ordinary,
tuning. I'll just give it like a summary for the audience. The fine tuning is the fact that if you change any of the physical constants in nature, such that they are different than they are now, even slightly, then life wouldn't be possible. So if you increase the gravitational constant even slightly, then everything would crash together and become a big black hole. If you decrease the gravitational constant, everything would go further apart at the early universe to then they wouldn't be able to form particles or planets or anything. So that's just one example. So that's the fine tuning.
well, one way that I explain fine tuning. Well, there are two aspects, as you know, of the fine tuning. The first aspect is the initial conditions. Okay, and the second aspect is, well, I guess we might say what some people call the anthropic principle, the fact that we have special conditions that created life. Uh, Now, one way that I like to explain it,
Well, the anthropic principle, I believe that was that life exists, and so whatever the conditions were at the universe must entail the conditions to create life. So that's those are I think those are
right,
the same thing.
right. No, no, I didn't say that they're the same thing. No, I'm saying that there are two different aspects of fine tuning. But the way that I like to explain it is to imagine a number of roulettes, okay, independent from one another. And you have to hit in every roulette, you have to hit a specific number. Without that specific number, you either have nothing, or you have an empty, cold universe, or you have no life whatsoever. And it seems to me that not only to me, because if we are honest, we know that the fine tuning of the universe is some sort of embarrassment, I call it, among scientists because they just cannot explain what it is. Now, it is. I find it interesting that some people have the confidence of saying, "Oh, that's not a problem." I've heard scientists say that it's not a problem. Um, it is a problem. It is a tough problem to explain. No one can explain it. The idea that there was a law uh, prior to the universe that set up the initial conditions and all the constants, the physical constants of the universe. Well, I just don't buy it.
Well, why? Why would that be worse than God? So my classical argument that I usually say is that if you think of the fine tuning as there is essentially a big number line, and uh, there's a tiny, tiny little red dot at the middle of the number line, and that tiny little dot is what allows for life. And we happen to be in that tiny, tiny little dot, and every other point on the number line is black, which doesn't allow for life. Um, well, the problem is that God doesn't seem to solve this problem because God could be such that for every single point on that number line, there's a possible way God could be where he could desire the universe to be that way. And so for each possible kind of a universe, there's equally as many kinds of gods who could want the universe to be that way. And so you have the exact same problem of asking, if God is such that he's going to create a life permitting universe, why does he have the particularly finely tuned constants in his nature to want a life permitting universe as opposed to a universe full of black holes or a universe full of hydrogen atoms or a universe where the particles flow away from each other faster than the speed of light or whatever? And so the God doesn't seem to solve the fine tuning problem at all. It just seems to be pose another fine tuning problem of who fine tuned God. And so I don't see how God actually solves the problem at all.
Um, I, I don't think I follow you. If suppose that there is a God, how does it solve the problem? Well, we're not talking about really a problem. We're talking about we're trying to determine how it's possible that the universe has the characteristics, the numeric characteristics, the values that necessary to be here. Now, I from my side and from my conversation with experts on this field and from the studies that I've done, what it seems to me is that it's highly improbable that all these values, which are not dependent on one another, as you know, all these values had to exactly hit precisely the values that they have. By coincidence, I don't think so. Now, to answer your question, how does God resolve the problem? I wouldn't put it that way. I would say if we assume that there is an intelligence that brings the universe into existence and sets those values, I think it's a very plausible explanation as to why the universe looks the way it looks. Um, and it would explain. Now, the advantage of that explanation is that physicists, scientists on a naturalistic worldview are having a hard time explaining why the universe is the way it is. Uh,
I don't.
on on a, on another view, and a different view that I suggest, there is an intelligence that causes all those values. So that's the simple answer. It's not about solving problems.
Well, the reason scientists are having difficulty answering what caused the fine tuning is because In physics, you're only allowed to posit things that have a basis in physics. So principles, particles, laws that are combinations of already known physics. You're not allowed to just add in whatever you want.
Right.
If physicists were allowed to add in whatever they want, they could solve the problem easily. In fact, there are a number of explanations in physics that explain fine tuning perfectly: many worlds, multiverse, and a determinate force that.
I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. I know it's rude. I don't like the way you put it, because you say there are many naturalistic explanations that perfectly explain. I wouldn't put it that way. With physicists, and in fact, physicists don't talk that way. What they say is that they propose models. This is my model. I propose to explain the fine tuning that way. Now, that being said, at the end of the day, I have never heard any physicist, reputable physicist, that says, I can bet my house, I can bet my life that that's the way it happened. A lot of these, as you know, I'm sure you know because you well read, as you know, all these are models, and these are highly speculative. But there's no one in the world right now that can tell you exactly, that has a viable explanation. An interesting, there are many interesting explanations, but not a viable explanation as to why the universe is finely tuned.
Well, this is the part I'm not understanding about your argument, because God is a model, just like multiverse is a model, and many worlds is a model, and the
Sure,
fine
it's a
structure constant is a model. So they're all models. But
right.
as I was trying to say earlier, in physics, you're only allowed to present models that are combinations of known principles, particles in physics that have been verified in some way. God isn't. God has lots of properties that have no basis in physics: omnipresence, omnipowerful, outside of space and time, whatever properties that make up a god. These aren't in physics. There's no like physics equation for omnipotence. And so the reason physicists don't allow those as um, criteria that they can use in a model is because it doesn't have a basis in physics. And so the one I like is the fine structure constant. The fine structure constant it's a number 1 over 137, and this number pops up in a bunch of relations between all of the other laws, all of the other constants. And this seems to imply that there is this one constant determines the relationship between the other constants. So there's one constant that is a unknown intertangling that forces all the other constants to have this relationship. Now, this has a basis in physics. We have evidence of this. The fine structure constant, it's a thing we have good evidence for. Whereas we have no evidence for omnipotence, omnipresence, whatever properties you think are entailed in a god. And so it seems like this answers the question. If we assume that there is this undiscovered fine structure constant, that fully explains why the laws have this relationship. And it does so using something that has evidence in physics. Whereas we compare that to the God hypothesis, those properties don't have a basis in physics. And so both can explain the data, but one has evidence that is fully based in physics, and one has evidence or does not have evidence of its properties in physics. And so it seems like the fine structure constant is a better explanation than a God in this context.
I don't see why. We will have to disagree on that. I don't see why it's a better explanation. Uh, a model proposed by a physicist has to do it's a complicated thing. It has to do with mathematical computation, mathematical models based on certain principles, as you said, but they don't explain why these laws or this law or this principle that you say exists in the first place, and how in the world this law, which is a heuristic, by saying law, physical law, it's a heuristic term to mean that we observe certain regularities. Okay. So that doesn't really explain anything. There are interesting explanations, interesting suggestions, but they don't really explain anything. No physicist can say with confidence, "Ah, the fine tuning is not a problem. We know how that happened. So that's unfortunately the problem here.
Well, so I'm not quite so like there's the fine tuning problem. I agree. We have this, and both people can assert a solution to what caused this. I assert it's an undiscovered law. Laws, again, are just you're right. They're representations of some physical thing that exists in the universe. So there is an actual thing, the fine structure constant, which exists as a physical thing. It's like a quantum field or a quantum something or another, and it determines all of the other forces. So if we say that there's this law that represents this quantum field, and this quantum field determined all of the other forces, that fully explains why we have all of these laws. Very, very concisely explains all of these laws. And you could say a God did it, and that would explain why we have these laws as the way they are. But neither one of those explains itself. God doesn't explain itself. The quantum field doesn't explain itself. And so neither one explains itself, but they do explain and give answers to the fine tuning. The difference in why the quantum field is better is because all of the parts of the quantum field theory are based in physics. There's no additions that have no basis in physics. Like all the math in the fine structure constant theory has been verified to exist in reality. All of the equations are things that we know exist in reality as some relation. Whereas that is not the case for God. God has extra properties. Like if I wanted to add in the theory of magic leprechaun to physics, that would make it a worse theory. That makes it less good because we have no evidence of magic leprechauns. So if I want to add in omnipotence or omnipresence or intelligence, which don't have a basis in physics, that would be as bad as adding in a magic leprechaun. So because the fine structure constant hypothesis is only using things that have already been verified in physics, that's a better explanation of the data. And neither one of these, either the fine structure constant or God, explain themselves. They both have that problem. Neither one explains themselves, but they do both explain the fine tuning.
Well, it seems to me that the a constant, once again, I can only repeat myself, a constant seems to imply that there is a rich, intricate structure or law or whatever we want to call it that is set up in such a way that has certain properties. Maybe if we want to put it that way, as certain properties such that it gives rise to the fine tuning. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would agree to that.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay. Now, it seems to me that that is not a good explanation because the obvious question would be, since this law, this constant, is quite rich, it's not very simple. It is very complicated. It's very intricate. It is very rich, such that it has the ability, well, not the ability, but the properties of bringing the universe into existence with all the physical constants, all the numbers, all the values where they are, where they should be. What explains that? Now you say, well, hold on. Now you say to me, I'm sure you respond to me, well, but what explains God? Well, it seems to me that on a rational basis, it seems to me that obviously, if you're an atheist, you don't believe that, and you say, well, I don't care about the explanation of God. Now, I'm not saying you specifically. I've heard many atheists say, well, I don't care about God. I don't think that God exists. But it seems to me more plausible that, or a better explanation, the notion that there is an intelligence which is a transcendent being, and it's what philosophers call a necessary being. And there's an argument for that. There are many arguments. I'm sure you know those arguments. We can't go back and back and back and back off on an infinite regress. So it seems that the most plausible explanation is that there is a fundamental being that explains itself. And that's what the definition of a necessary being is. Now, if you say to me, well, I can explain that with a law. Well, a law, as I said, it's a heuristic terminology to mean something like we have observed certain constants in the universe, a certain behavior of a certain phenomena. But that doesn't explain why this behavior should be there. You say, from my understanding, on your part, you say, well, it's just there. And I
Well,
say,
no, I
I
would. So
find it.
I
Oh,
want
I'm
to
sorry
clarify
if I
that.
misrepresented you. I don't know if that's
Well,
what
I
you.
just want to clarify. So when I say a law is our description of a physical thing in nature. So a law represents a quantum field. So it's not just random. This is a determined fact of a thing in nature. So quantum field, when I say the fine structure constant, I'm saying there is a quantum field that has a nature to it that determines this number. Or this relationship. So it's not just random. This is an actual physical thing that exists in the universe that we're representing with a law. And so that would kind of like be like you think God exists, I think a quantum field exists. These are both physical things or existing things, and they determine the fine tuning. They determine all of the other laws, just like dominoes determine the other dominoes are going to fall. And so both are full explanations of the fine tuning because the fine tuning is determined by this existing thing, God or the quantum field. And we describe that by the law. The law is just a description of the thing that exists. But I don't understand why I can't say the quantum field is the necessary being. Why do I need to say a God is there? I think the quantum field explains itself. It is the most fundamental thing, and I don't need this intelligence because the quantum field seems far simpler than an
Mhm.
triple omni being with intelligence and chooses things. Because there could again be, it seems to me logically possible that there could be a God for each different kind of universe. There could be a God who wants black holes, a God who wants only puppies, a God who wants only hydrogen atoms. So for each different way the universe could be, there's also a way God could be. For the just like how the universe is finely tuned, because there's infinitely many ways the universe could be, only a very small number allow for life. There's an infinitely many ways God could be, and only a very small number of ways God could be would create a life permitting universe. So God is equally as fine tuned as the universe. It doesn't seem to solve the problem. And if you just want to say he explains himself, well, we can just say the quantum field explains itself. And that seems to be, again, a better explanation on the quantum field side because that's the quantum field is only things we have basis for in physics. It doesn't add anything new, whereas God's adding a whole bunch of new stuff that we don't have evidence for. And so the quantum field is simpler.
Well, I have a couple of things to say. Let me see if I remember all of them. Well, first of all, I wanted to say when you talk about the quantum field is a very rich um, entity, not a simple entity. It's governed by specific laws.
Nature. Well, it's not governed by laws, it's governed by its nature. Laws are just our description.
Right, right. As we said a million times, laws are our descriptions of constant behaviors of phenomena. Right. But the point is the behavior, the very existence and the behavior of the quantum field imply that there are certain constants, certain very specific phenomena and behaviors of this field. And it seems to me, once again, not a good explanation. But let me give you another argument. Not a good explanation to say, well, the quantum field just explains itself and it's just there, it's eternal. Because it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, your position is that the quantum field is eternal. Is that
No,
correct? You
no.
don't think it's
The quantum field is outside of space and time are emergent properties from the quantum field. There's nothing wrong with an eternal past. The consensus in physics is that there's an eternal past. There's no logical contradiction with an eternal past. But the argument I'm presenting is
well,
that there's a
actually,
quantum.
there is a
No,
contradiction on an infinite past.
even Plato and Aristotle, who invented the idea of the infinite past, admit there's no logical contradiction with an infinite past. William Lane Craig admits there's no logical contradiction with an infinite past.
Right.
Alvin Plantinga and Russell Pruss, it's not, I forgot his first name, something Pruss. Pruss, they admit there's no logical contradiction with an infinite past. Like, a logical contradiction is P and not P, whereas they present like intuitive contradictions, things they don't intuitively understand, like the Grim Reaper paradox, but that's not a logical contradiction. And again, the consensus among physicists is that there is an infinite past. There's a few models that don't have that, but most do. But I don't want to debate the infinite past version. I'm just saying, let's grant that there is a quantum field outside of space-time, and it and space and time are emergent from this quantum field. So there's a necessary quantum field outside of space-time, and it created space-time as an emergent property.
Well, first of all, we're not going there, as you said. But first of all, I want to correct you that it is not true that Alvin Plantinga says that. I mean, it's true and it's not true. While they say, although all the names that you mentioned, they believe that there is no logical contradiction. There are in logic there are different categories of what is strictly logical or logically possible. And Alvin Plantinga and William Lane Craig and all the other people that you mentioned, and Pruss, I know Pruss personally.
Alexander Pruss, that's his first name, right? Alexander
Pruss. I know Alexander Pruss. They don't think that they think that it is logically possible, just like it's logically possible that I can take off and fly in the sky, but they don't think that it is metaphysically possible that there is an infinite regress. As a matter of fact, I mean, the very William Lane Craig that you mentioned, he made a career, as you know, probably on the fact that it is impossible to have an infinite past. But anyway, we don't have to talk about that. Going back to staying focused, right? Going back to what we're saying, you say that the quantum field exists outside space and time. That seems to me an interesting suggestion, because I don't think that anybody thinks that the quantum field is spaceless and timeless. At least not timeless. It is a world that exists or a condition that exists in time, not outside time. But let me finish a sentence and then
well, I just want to clarify, like, this is the consensus in physics, is that space and time are emergent. You just Google emergent space-time. That's the consensus, is that the quantum fields exist outside of space-time, and space and time are emergent from quantum fields. But I don't think that it doesn't matter how many physicists agree with it. The point is
exactly that it doesn't matter. We don't care about the consensus. A lot of people say they consent on many things. The point is that if the quantum field, as you refer to, is in time, well, there are certain problems. If it's not
out of time,
no, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is, either it's in time or it's outside time. You just said it's outside time and space. Okay.
Yeah.
My problem with that is that a quantum field outside time, I don't see how that explains how a non-rational, non-physical, and atemporal object, if we want to, sorry for the term object, let's call it object, okay, this quantum field, explains how it gives rise to a universe that exists in time. So I think it's in the literature, if you have read anything about the literature, it's a philosophical huge problem to explain how do you go from a non-temporal state to a temporal state. And so it seems that, once again, if you postulate the existence of a God, the existence of an intelligence, you have the answer, because there is an intelligence that has intentions and that can cause a temporal event out of a non-temporal event. But to say that a non-temporal event, not a mind, but a process that who knows why it's there, gives rise to the universe and to the fine-tuning and to life and to DNA and to consciousness. Once again, the only thing that I can say to you is that I really don't buy that.
Well, I don't buy that there is an intention or a mind that exists outside of space-time and it caused all of these things. To me, that seems even more implausible because there's no evidence for intentions or minds existing outside of space-time. We do have intelligence for quantum properties existing outside of space-time. So if there's this quantum field, it has a nature to it very similar to how virtual particles pop in and out of existence independent of time, and how we can solve the general relativity problem with removing the time variable. Space and time, we can remove them from the equation and you can still solve the equations. And so you can show that there are still variables that can operate without space and time. And so we have good evidence that there's things in physics that can operate outside of space and time, where we have no evidence intentions or minds or persons exist outside of space or time. And so to say that an intention or a person was the cause of this would be like saying a pineapple was the cause of this. Like, there's no evidence pineapples can exist outside of space and time.
But a pineapple, even
one sec, my alarm is going off. I gotta get that one. Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned a pineapple. Doesn't matter the example, but a pineapple would not explain why there's a pineapple and then the pineapple brings into existence everything, the universe.
I agree. The point of the pineapple was just saying here is an object that we have no evidence could exist outside of space time.
But look, Tom, before you continue, now you're throwing this word evidence.
Yeah.
On the discussion that we're having, there's no really evidence in the sense it's very controversial. I wouldn't use that word evidence. There's no evidence that there's a quantum field outside space and time. Once again, these are models that some physicists use. Not all physicists agree. I wouldn't use the word evidence unless you use evidence in a special way that I can agree with you.
Well, let me try to.
I don't know what kind of evidence you're referring to when we're talking about we're not even talking about what we observe in the universe, which it's already complicated and there's a little evidence. But we're talking about something that should exist prior to the existence of the universe. I don't see how we can talk about evidence. There's no evidence.
So
unless
evidence.
Use the word evidence in some other way.
So evidence in this context in physics, everything in physics is a derivative equation, and the derivative equations are all things that have been verified through novel testable predictions in physics. You're not allowed to just put in whatever you want into a physics equation. You have to use some particular equation to make a prediction, and then once that prediction or regularity has been confirmed to be a successful model, then you're allowed to use particular things. Like you can add in WIMPs, weakly interactive massive particles, but those aren't accepted as being confirmed, so you can't add those into like any theory you want.
Right.
And
But that
so,
was just a minor point.
no. This is, I'm just giving you my definition of why I considered one evidence and one not. So the reason quantum fields, or let's say, I'll use the easy example of the multiverse. The multiverse is a combination of two equations: the Guth's early universe inflation combined with virtual particles and the Casimir effect in the early and the energy of empty space. So if you combine those two equations, you get the universe, the multiverse. Now, both of these things have an empirical basis. Guth's early universe inflation was observed to have empirical consequences on observations of the CMB, which we saw. So that's confirmed. That's good evidence of the
right.
Guth's early universe inflation. We have good evidence of virtual particles and the Casimir effect. That's an empirical experiment we do in a lab that has good evidence of this equation. So both of these equations have been confirmed. We don't know if they're combined. We can't show that they're combined, but both of these things have independently been shown to exist. And so if you have a theory that combines both of these things, that's better than a theory that combines these things and adds magical leprechauns. Like, there's no evidence of magical leprechauns. That doesn't exist in physics. There is zero evidence of magical leprechauns, but there is evidence of early universe inflation. There is evidence of Casimir effect. But
Right.
magical
But there's
leprechauns,
evidence, and there's evidence. The very Guth and I will add Board and Vilenkin theorem, as you know, there is evidence that any universe that is expanding has to have a beginning.
no.
Yes,
Board,
that's what the Board Guth Vilenkin
no, it
theorem
doesn't.
implies.
This is a different topic. So I literally have Board and Guth on and Vilenkin on record stating that the Board Guth Vilenkin theorem does not state that. It states that the inflation had a beginning. It doesn't state the universe had a beginning. I have the videos of them saying this verbatim, which I'll bring up in a minute. But
I
that's a
watched
relevant
those
point. Wait,
videos.
that's an irrelevant point.
Nothing to do with the theorem.
Wait. That's an irrelevant point here. The point I'm making is that the reason that the quantum field counts as evidence and God does not count as evidence is because in physics we have supporting evidence for each of the models. Each of the pieces of the models have been shown to exist in physics with an empirical verification, whereas the parts of God, omnipotence, omnipresence, intelligence outside of space-time, those are kind of like a magic leprechaun. They have no evidence in physics whatsoever. So the
How
multiverse
could they?
combination,
How could they have evidence of God?
well, novel predictions, but the
The
point here,
kind of evidence that you're speaking of, obviously, no physicist could have evidence of God. You can't put God in a laboratory if there is a God. So
well,
I'm
that's
not
just
sure
admitting you
why.
don't have evidence.
So I'm not sure why you mentioned there is no evidence of leprechauns. There is no evidence of God. But remember that when the evidence in physics that we have do not preclude the existence of a creator. All that we do in physics is try to explain with models, try to explain in naturalistic terms how the universe came into existence. Not because physicists are against God, not because physicists are against leprechauns, only because physicists are natural scientists, and natural science is not in the business of explaining transcendent beings. That's all. Natural scientists say, I'm not even going into that business because I wouldn't know how to do it. So the fact that you say there is evidence for this, there is evidence for that, the only thing that we have is models, interesting, very interesting models. And I'm not saying that they're false or they're wrong. It might turn out that, in fact, the position that you're defending is the true position, and I'm wrong. But
I don't understand how that.
these are interesting models that explain, in terms of physical properties, how the universe might have come into existence, but they don't explain why there's a universe in the first place, what created those laws, what created that, as you call it, the quantum field. That's the point.
I don't understand what you're saying here. So the quantum field is necessary. It's uncreated. It is a necessary being. It can't be created. And it created the universe with the fine tuning as the way it is.
But let me ask you, who says that it's uncreated? Who says it?
Most physicists.
Now, Tom, come on. Now, come along. You want me to believe that physicists have the evidence that there is a quantum field that is eternal, was never created. I'm not sure where you read or you heard that thing, because that's more science fiction than the science fiction you watch on TV.
Wait, I already explained this. The properties. Wait. All of the properties in these theories have been confirmed with physics, so we can solve the general and special relativity. Wait. We can solve the general. Wait. Listen. Let me finish the argument. We can solve the equations for general and special relativity without space and time. Space and time are represented by a variable, the lambda variable. We can remove the lambda variable and still solve the equations, which means there are still factors of things that we have verified to exist, which can do work causality without space and time. That's the consensus among physicists, that we can do these things without space and time. And so these things can exist without space and time, which means they are no beginning.
I think you are confusing mathematical models. Maybe what you have in mind is something like the Hartle-Hawkins model.
No, it is not.
No? Okay.
No.
You have in mind mathematical models that based on imaginary numbers that remove time from the concept of space.
These aren't imaginary numbers. So again, all those numbers represent things which have been demonstrated to exist. So none of them are imaginary numbers.
No, by imaginary number, I don't mean number that you know what imaginary numbers are in mathematics. It's
like literally the I variable.
Yes, no, these are not imaginary numbers in the sense that you imagine these numbers. No, it's a mathematical branch that studies things like, for example, a negative square root. The square root of a negative number is referred to as imaginary. This is very complicated. I don't even want to get into this because
well, none of that matters to my argument. None of that addresses my argument.
The point is, what you have in mind are mathematical models. And that's fine. That's fine. I don't dispute the science. What I'm disputing is that there's no human being that can be so arrogant as to saying that he or she knows that prior to the existence of the universe, there was something like, whatever you want to call it, a pineapple or a quantum field that is atemporal and spaceless. I don't think anybody on this earth can do that, can say that.
Well, what I'm saying is, I can say every physicist is more confident that exists than a God exists. Every physicist has more evidence, more justification, more support for that than God. It is more irrational to say a God outside of space-time or a mind outside of space-time exists than it is to say a quantum field outside of space-time exists. There is evidence to say a quantum field exists outside of space-time. There is zero evidence to indicate a mind exists outside of space-time. The evidence for a mind outside of space-time is equivalent to the evidence of a pineapple outside of space-time, which is zero. The evidence for a quantum field outside of space-time, that does exist. It's not strong. It's not like we don't have tons of evidence, but it does exist in physics. There is zero evidence in physics of a mind or a pineapple.
Tom, I don't think you're being honest here, because if you say that there's evidence, mathematical models, but let me explain. Don't be offended. Let me explain to you why I think you're not being honest. Because I think that when you're comparing two different things. You're saying there are mathematical models, which I don't dispute. Okay, there are mathematical models. They're very interesting, and they try to show that there is such a thing as a quantum field, which is spaceless and timeless. That is prior to the existence of the universe. That's fine. I don't know how you would go about determining other than mathematical models. And as I said, these mathematical models, as I try to explain to you, most of them are based on what is known as imaginary numbers. And
Well, imaginary numbers, again, have been confirmed to exist. So that means it's better than God. So if we're using imaginary numbers, that's better than God.
No. If you study imaginary numbers and you understand what they are
Vectors.
they are very useful. They're very useful in explaining certain things in mathematics. But the problem with imaginary numbers is that they do not refer to the actual physical world, in a sense that they don't describe the world. Just like in mathematics, when you do a calculation, for example, solve for x, and x turns out to be a negative number. Now, negative numbers don't exist in a sense that there's no such thing as negative. For example, if you say I'm in my bank account, I have negative $2, but there's no such thing as negative $2. These things don't exist. So it's very complicated. But again,
well, it's not
this is not
complicated.
the point. No, it is very complicated.
No, it's not. Imaginary numbers have been used to make successful predictions about reality. So they do describe reality. They don't directly. They're vectors. They describe vectors.
Exactly. They don't.
But those
reality.
correspond to reality. God does not. Imaginary mind outside of space-time has no predictive success in reality. Imaginary numbers do have predictive success in reality. Imaginary numbers therefore have evidence. God does not have evidence. So even by your own example, you're proving that imaginary numbers in space-time or quantum fields outside of space-time is better than a God, because those have successful predictive success, whereas God has zero. So God has as much evidence as a magical pineapple. Imaginary numbers have good evidence. Like, those are good things, rational to believe in. God is irrational to believe in.
Yes, but as I was explaining to you, the reason why I accused you of not being totally honest is because I was saying, when you talk about these mathematical models, you are in a certain realm of a discourse. But when you then say we have evidence for the physical world, we use mathematical models, but we have zero evidence that there is God. But you're not being honest, because these are two different discourses. Physics, as we said a million times, a trillion times, is not in the business of confirming the existence of God. And there couldn't be, I don't think there could be a mathematical model that would prove the possibility that there's a God. So there are two different things here.
Well, I agree, but that means that in physics there is no evidence of God, but in physics there is evidence of quantum fields. So in physics, we have reason to believe in quantum fields, but no reason to believe in God.
Sure, but once again, the physicists do not preclude the existence of a God. All they say is, I don't know if there's a God. There might be a God, but all the evidence that I have, here's the evidence. Wonderful. And I'm glad that we have science. I'm glad that we have physicists working hard to explain things. But that's as far as it gets. They only
just to clarify,
in terms of naturalistic explanation, how the universe works, and that's where they stop. I don't think it is
not where they stop. That's not. So I want to clarify. It does preclude a God. So if
no,
the fine tuning, wait.
No,
So if the fine tuning is caused by the quantum field, then it is not caused by God. So if the fine tuning can be explained by the quantum field, that precludes God explaining the fine tuning. If the quantum field can explain the Big Bang, that means it's not explained by God. It precludes God from explaining the cosmological argument, the origin of the universe. So if this natural thing exists and it caused the origin of the universe and the fine tuning, then God did not cause the origin of the universe or the fine tuning. And that's the theory. The theory is that God does not exist, but this thing does exist. That's the consensus among physicists.
Well, I have to say, I'm not as confident as you are, and I don't think it is true that physicists, scientists, as you describe, are as confident as you are. You're suggesting that there is something outside space and time that uh, that explains the existence, not only the existence of the universe, but also the coming into time of the universe. I don't think that there's anything in the literature. Maybe we're reading two different things. The literatures. There's no physicist. I often talk to physicists in my department. No physicist is that confident as to saying, "Yeah, we solved the problem. Didn't you know? It was on the front page of the New York Times. We found how the universe came into existence." There's no that level of confidence.
Well,
I wouldn't be that confident, and no one is in science, in fact.
yes, but they're all confident it wasn't God. Like, God isn't an acceptable hypothesis in physics, whereas emergent spacetime is. Like, it's not proven, I agree, but all physicists agree quantum fields have evidence, God does not. That's like the consensus among physics. So this is an acceptable solution for emergent spacetime. I have like
Sure.
emergent spacetime is the consensus among physicists. Like, there are many polls, like the Foundational Attitudes Towards Physics poll, that literally say this. This is the consensus among physicists.
But once again, when you say it's the consensus, I
Yeah.
don't. I mean, we don't want to commit the fallacy of appealing to authorities or the majority. I respect the scientific evidence. Okay, I am not a science denier. I'm not a religious person who says God magically created everything and all that scientists say is a lie here. All I'm saying is that we don't have that level of confidence. And I don't know to whom you spoke, but all the physicists at university departments that I have conferred with don't have that level of confidence. When asked, is it possible? Any physicist, any physicist you ask him, is it possible that in fact there's a God? I don't think that there's one that would say, no, it's impossible. I think that most physicists, in fact, are very open to the possibility that, after all, there might be God and intelligence behind, except for Lawrence Krauss, maybe, who's just a knucklehead. But most physicists are not confident that way, and they're open to the idea that there could be a God that created the universe and everything, and fine-tuned the universe and so on.
Well, right. They're also open to the possibility of Magic Leprechaun did it. But again, as we both agreed in, yes, physicists equally allow the possibility of Magic Leprechauns and
I've
God.
never heard a serious physicist saying that
Sean Carroll.
Exist.
Sean Carroll. He's a serious physicist.
Well, good luck to him. What can I tell
Nima Arkani Hamad, serious physicist. Leonard Susskind, serious physicist. They all say this. But I wanted to go back to what originally we both agreed, that knowledge does not require certainty. We both agree that we don't need to be certain. All we need is to have evidence. And all of the physicists agree we have evidence of quantum fields, but no evidence of gods. In physics, there is zero evidence of God. That is why it is not acceptable in any physics paper to posit God as a solution for anything in physics. But it is okay to say quantum fields exist, not created by God. You're not allowed to say God created quantum fields and then. You are allowed to say quantum fields, which is a thing that has been shown to be a thing that exists in physics, can do stuff outside of space-time. That's a rational paper to publish. God is not. And so I'm not sure what you're like. The argument we're making here is, which is a better explanation of the physics data we have of fine-tuning. Quantum fields win in every physics paper ever published for every physicist in the world. Nobody thinks God is a better explanation in physics of the data we have in physics. It's not, you can't use it as an explanation.
But a physicist wouldn't say that, because, as I said a number of times this morning, physics.
Sean Carroll literally said that in his debate with William Lane Craig. He literally said that.
Said what?
That
you
no physicists posit God as a solution for anything in physics. It's not even allowed in physics. You're not allowed to publish papers on it in physics. I'm quoting Sean Carroll from his debate.
what you interrupted my sentence. That's what I was going to say, because we agreed. I said a number of times this morning that physicists are not in the business of religion or transcendent beings. They couldn't be. How could they? How could they even begin to describe the non-physical world, the transcendent world? It's not the business of physics. So
yes, it is. It
when you
is the
say
business of physics. So if a God existed
business
and
of
God
physics
made,
is
if
not God.
this is very, very, very easy. If God existed and made testable predictions that confirmed facts of the universe, that would be evidence of God. If the God hypothesis was able to predict the fine structure constant, or was able to predict the energy perturbations in space-time, that would be evidence of a God. God is a hypothesis exactly the same as the quantum field. One makes predictions, one does not. That means the one that does not is bad, and we don't accept it. So the reason physicists don't allow God is because it has no evidence, it has no predictive power, it does nothing as a hypothesis. It is a bad hypothesis. Quantum fields are a good hypothesis. They explain the data, they make testable predictions, we can use mathematical models to describe them. God, we can't do any of that, which means demonstrably that God is a bad hypothesis. It is not rational to believe as a solution because it can't answer any of these questions.
I can only repeat myself. I don't think you're being honest when you say that God is a bad explanation. I don't think it's a bad explanation. I don't think any physicist, serious physicist, talking seriously, would exclude the existence of God. I don't think, I don't know if you would exclude completely the existence of God. I don't see how you could completely preclude that possibility and
Well, I
say
don't preclude
it's
it.
not a good explanation because it doesn't make predictions.
It has no evidence.
Again, you're confusing two different realms, two different magisteria. As
There are no different magisteria. There are any hypothesis of any magisteria. It either makes predictions and it has evidence, or it doesn't make predictions and has no evidence.
You can look. You can. You're entitled to your own opinions, of course, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Right, and a fact of an evidence is it has to make predictions.
Right, but that's fine. That's fine. I'm not disputing that. Physicists present models of the universe. When they go home at the end of the day, they can have personal opinions based on the very things that they're studying, and they can say to you off the records or on the records, they can say to you, ultimately, I don't believe in a God. There are many physicists, as you know, who have the same numbers, the same predictions, do the same job as the atheist physicist, and yet at the end of the day, they say, I believe that there exists a God. Okay. Now, if you throw at me again, the majority doesn't believe this, I don't know what to do with the majority. All that I want to point out is that the explanation that there is a God behind the fine tuning of the universe, the very existence, I don't think that they are bad explanations. I don't think anyone thinks that there are bad explanations. All the greatest philosophers in the history of philosophy, all the greatest thinkers thought that it is a very good explanation that there is a God behind all the complexity that we experience in the world. And not only that, but many other things like consciousness, mathematics, logic, and so on. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say it's just a bad explanation. It's not a bad explanation at all. It's just an explanation that cannot be tested through our physical knowledge. That's all.
That makes it a bad explanation. But you said you weren't interested in
according to
According
you.
to every methodology in science that we have,
No,
every
it's not.
methodology. But
No,
you mentioned
that's
that you weren't interested in what you didn't know what to do with the appeal to authority, and then you gave an appeal to authority and
oh, yeah,
said
I
many
know
of the
you would
people in
say
the
that.
past.
Oh, I knew you would say that. Of course. I
But
am not.
I wanted to say
Look, that was
the
not my major
fact that
argument. That's why. Please don't accuse me of committing the appeal to authority. That was not my intention.
well, it wasn't mine either. You said you
Okay.
don't know any serious physicists who would say this. Literally, the consensus of all physicists say this, and that's why I brought it up. So you keep saying that you don't know any serious
Again, as I said,
physicists.
the physicists with whom I conferred never said that God is completely out of the question. No one said that. Maybe you've
Sean
been.
Carroll.
I haven't. I don't know Sean Carroll. I haven't spoken to Sean Carroll. If he is confident that the universe can be explained completely without any appeal to a deity, he's welcome to it. I'm not offended by it. That's fine. But there are many others. Sean Carroll is not the only physicist in the world. There are many others who are open to that possibility.
Well,
So I don't think
thing,
I don't understand why we're dwelling on Sean Carroll when there are many other physicists. If that's the kind of argument that you want to
right. That's why I brought up the consensus. Most physicists agree with Sean Carroll. God is not an acceptable hypothesis for the reason you stated earlier. God is not physically demonstrable in any sense in physics.
So if you want
Therefore,
to
it's a bad hypothesis in physics. Like all physicists agree on this. If you can't use physical data to demonstrate it, it's a bad physical hypothesis. Like
no,
you
it's
can't
not a
use
bad
it in
hypothesis.
physics.
No, it's not a bad hypothesis. It's just a different kind of hypothesis.
How is it not as bad as saying a magic leprechaun did it or a magic pineapple? How is it? How those are bad you agree saying a magic leprechaun or a magic pineapple are bad hypotheses, right?
I mean, I'm at a loss of words. Look, leprechauns.
Do you agree those are bad hypotheses?
Right? No, I don't think so because we have better reasons to believe. We have good reasons to believe that things like leprechauns do not exist.
We have good reason to think things like gods
On
don't
the
exist.
other hand,
Exactly the same.
we have very good reasons to believe that God exists, but God is not a leprechaun.
Wait, what's the difference here? Because I see no difference between God and leprechauns or magic pineapples.
I mean, I would have to state the obvious, Tom. Leprechauns are fictional characters invented by people. God is not.
Gods.
Well, obviously, according to you, because you're an atheist, you call yourself an atheist. You say it's a fictional character. I don't think it's a fictional character. I think that there are many arguments for the existence of God, and they're sound arguments. They're cogent arguments. There are no arguments, cogent arguments, or sound arguments for the existence of leprechauns. I can only state the obvious. I mean,
well, I would agree. I think I agree with you there. So I want to say, like, if there were no cogent arguments for the existence of a God, that would make us rational to be atheists and say there is no God, right?
Ultimately, I don't think so because your position of atheism that you will have to explain to me exactly what kind of atheist you are.
There is no God.
Yes. I knew your answer. The point is, if you are an atheist and you say there's no possible way that God exists, but I don't think you're saying that, right? That's not your position.
Right. Well, I'm trying to say the same position
you
did about leprechauns.
I don't see how atheism, that sort of atheism. So we agree that sort of atheism is not rational.
Well, would you say it's rational to believe there are no leprechauns?
But I don't know why we're talking about leprechauns. There are no leprechauns. We have no evidence that leprechauns exist.
Yes, I agree.
Tell me,
so,
right, you agree. So why are you even trying this line of argumentation? Look,
Wait.
You
So
know that.
let
Hold
me
on,
explain that.
Tom.
Let me explain that for you.
You know
That's a good
that there
question. Wait,
aren't
one sec.
any good arguments. Okay, you're the host. You're the boss.
Well, so I agree that because there is no good reason to believe in leprechauns, we are rational to say there is no leprechaun. We have good reason to believe it's a made-up figment of human imagination.
Right.
So if there's no good reason to believe in God, and we have good reasons to believe God is a figment of human imagination, we are equally as justified in saying there is no God as we are saying there are no leprechauns. And so if there's equally no justification for either, we're equally as justified in rejecting both. That's why I brought it up.
Well, maybe so, but there are there are very good arguments for the existence of God. Now, you might want to reject all of them. Okay, there are many arguments for the existence of God. Either, I mean, both. There are deductive arguments and inductive arguments. So the deductive arguments, in my view, many deductive arguments for the existence of God are sound arguments, and many inductive arguments for the existence of God are cogent. Now, if you don't think so, that's fine. But I think that there are very strong arguments, cogent and sound arguments for the existence of God. Leprechauns, I don't know any argument, even remote, not even a valid argument. I mean, actually, you can make valid arguments about leprechauns, but not sound arguments. I don't know anyone who would seriously defend the existence of leprechauns or teapots or pineapples in the sky. On the other hand, we have a rich history of valid and sound and cogent arguments for the existence of God.
But if we start with
hold on.
Okay.
Now, so because I want to answer your question, so would it be rational? Wouldn't it be rational? I think that ultimately atheism is not a rational position. But let me explain what I mean. If by atheism you want to argue that there's no possible way that there is a God, I don't think that that's a rational position at all. As a irrational person, you would have to say that there is a possibility that there exists a God, and that's all. That's the best that you can do with atheism. So, if you are suggesting that, let's call it a softer atheism or a weaker kind of atheism, I'm fine with it. But there's no possible way that anybody can have arguments so strong to show that there is no God. It's impossible. It's an impossibility. And people have tried, by the way, in the history of philosophy. They have tried and they have failed.
Do you have arguments that prove leprechauns are logically impossible?
Well, proving a negative, something that doesn't exist, is complicated. It's possible. It's not impossible. But I don't even waste my time. Why would I waste my time proving that leprechauns don't exist? We have very good evidence that they don't exist. Very good evidence. On the other hand, we have very, very good evidence that God exists.
Yeah. So everything you just said is atheism. You are an leprechaunist. You think that leprechauns do not exist for all of the reasons you just said. And for the exact same reasons, I am an atheist. I think that God doesn't exist for the exact same reasons you think leprechauns don't exist. So is it rational for you to be an leprechaunist? Is it rational for you to say leprechauns do not exist, even though you don't have a logical argument to disprove leprechauns? Yes, it is rational to say leprechauns don't exist because, one, there's no good evidence for leprechauns, and two, we have good evidence to believe leprechauns are a figment of human imagination. If both of those properties are true, it is rational to reject the existence of leprechauns, even if you don't have a logical argument disproving leprechauns. The same thing is true for atheism, isn't it?
Not exactly the same thing. The problem with atheism problem with atheism is that there aren't any good arguments for atheism. And when you, if you, well, I'm sorry that statement frustrated you, but I don't think that there are any good arguments for atheism. On
What
the
are
other,
the good arguments for a leprechaunism?
good arguments for what?
A leprechaunism, that leprechauns do not exist. What is the good argument that leprechauns do not exist?
I'm not sure why we're still talking about leprechauns.
Because they're analogous positions.
You're using that as an analog to mean that God is just as silly as leprechauns.
No. You keep saying that atheism is unjustified because it doesn't have any good arguments God does not exist. But a leprechaunism, the belief leprechauns do not exist, is justified even though there are no good arguments leprechauns don't exist. The reason is because you don't need arguments that show leprechauns are logically impossible. You don't need that. You don't need arguments to show God is logically impossible. All you need is arguments that show God is likely a figment of human imagination and that there is no evidence of God. And with that, you can be a rational atheist and say there is no God, even though you don't have a logical proof God does not exist. You don't need a logical proof God does not exist, just like you don't need a...
If I said that, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant to say. What I meant to say is that the arguments for atheism that you just mentioned, I mean, you didn't mention the actual arguments, but you said that you have good reasons to believe that God doesn't exist, and that's enough to warrant atheism. Is that what you said?
So my argument for atheism would be, if there is no evidence, no good evidence that indicates a God, and there is good evidence to indicate God is a figment of human imaginations, then atheism is rational.
Right, but I don't think personally, well, obviously I don't have to tell you, that's why we're here today. Obviously, I don't think that there are good arguments to support atheism. If that's what you need for atheism, I don't see how you can show that there are no good arguments for the existence of God. There are plenty of arguments for the existence of God. I'm sure you are well educated. I can see you must have read many arguments, right?
Yes.
I'm sure. So you are aware of many arguments for the existence of God. Now, we don't have to go through them. We can if you want to, but it seems to me that, to give you an example, the arguments for existence.
Well, the fine-tuning argument. So let's go back to that one just for a minute. Well, I wanted to bring that one up. So the reason that when we were talking about that, you admitted there is no evidence in physics for God. No physical evidence of God, like physical. You can't test him in
not
physics.
The kind of evidence that you have in mind when you talk about evidence, in a sense, going into a laboratory and dropping a drop of this liquid in the other liquid, and you have evidence that both liquid produce some other substance. Not that kind of thing.
Right. So if the only evidence we have is the fine-tuning argument, the fine-tuning argument fails, because what you need for the fine-tuning argument to work is you need some other arguments. You need some other arguments or evidence that are not in physics that already show God exists, like the moral argument or something. And then if you already have evidence God exists, then God can explain the fine-tuning. But without these other arguments or evidence, God alone does not explain the fine-tuning. There's no evidence of God. Just the fine-tuning on its own is not evidence of God. You need the other arguments.
But don't you, I don't know, let me ask you this question. Don't you think, are you open to the even the notion that all the arguments for the existence of God work as an ensemble?
Cumulative case.
Exactly, a cumulative case.
Yes.
It seems to me that there are so many arguments for the existence of God that to deny that there's good evidence for the existence of God, I think it's pure madness.
Well, I think I can demonstrate it. So I can go through each and every one of the arguments and show that all of the arguments are better explained by other phenomenon. So if, for example, if one thing better explains all other arguments than God, then all of the arguments do not indicate a God; they indicate this other thing. Because
I'm not sure how you you see, my problem is that you already said this morning a number of times that this has a superior or a better explanation of the phenomenon. I'm not sure. In order to say that, it seems to me that you need some standards, and I don't understand where you get the standards. Now, I'm sure I know the answer to that question. You're going to say, "Well, science is my standard, and scientists say that to me, and I believe in science." Okay, fine. But
I don't think I would say that.
I don't think that all the arguments for the existence of God, for example, the moral argument, the ontological arguments, that you can explain better. There are other explanations. Of course, there are naturalistic explanations, but I don't take as an example, and I don't want to necessarily direct the conversation this way. I'm just giving you an example, so you can take it or leave it. Okay, just for example, and again, I've done this a million times teaching at the university these arguments, so I know exactly where you're going to respond. You know what I'm going to say. Take, for example, the argument from consciousness, the existence of consciousness. Now, as you know, if you have studied any philosophy of mind, as you know, the problem of consciousness, as
Hard problem.
Chalmers refers to it as the hard problem, right? It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle. How do we explain? We can explain now. Biology has all sorts of explanations. When you look at the history of dualism and materialism and all the theories throughout history, now we have come to the point where biologists, neuroscientists are able to tell you which part of the brain, which group of neurons, okay, solve certain problems, and fine. But what about consciousness? No one can explain consciousness. That's why Chalmers calls it the hard. By the way, another philosopher, I don't know if I'm sure you heard his name, Daniel Dennett, says, "Oh, there is no hard problem." Okay, that's his view. I think that the problem of consciousness is like a punch in the face for thinkers, because it's just mysterious that matter should have consciousness. Now, I know already where you're going to say what atheists are going to say. We can explain consciousness as an emergence property, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe it's an emergence property. There's no explanation, good explanation as to why matter, when it evolves into a complicated, a sophisticated structure, should have such an emergent property as consciousness. So is that a bad argument for I think it's a very good argument for the existence of God.
How? Because to me, it seems like a God of the gaps fallacy.
I'm not sure what you know what the God of the gap fallacy is. This is not the God of the gap fallacy at all.
Well, the way I hear it is, it's like consciousness is something we can't explain.
That's not my
God
argument.
can explain it, therefore God.
No, that's not my argument. My argument is that the argument is that consciousness is better explained, okay, in terms of the existence of mind. The existence of mind, and what I mean by mind, I don't mean a physical entity that produces that. For example, intentionality, as you know, is another puzzle in philosophy of mind. How do you explain that a material object is about anything else? I can think about things. There are relationships relationships between the mental and the physical world. Now, what is the best explanation, the most plausible explanation? Now, if you postulate the existence of God, which is, according to theist and not and deist, is an unembodied mind, it is not a surprise that there should be minds, other minds, and it shouldn't be a surprise that there is consciousness. Now, on a naturalistic view, the naturalist would have to say that nature, matter, atoms, and so on can come into existence by some other non-mental state and atemporal state, and then organize themselves so well that they become consciousness. I don't know. I think that is not as powerful as an explanation as the explanation that there is a God, there's a mind.
I'm not seeing how. So we don't know what causes consciousness, and then you're going to say a different consciousness explains consciousness. Well, that doesn't seem to explain consciousness. You're just saying there's another consciousness there that created the first consciousness. That's just an infinite regress. So I don't see how that explains the data at all. You're just saying that we don't need to explain consciousness. It was already there.
Well, if you say consciousness is already there, well, I would agree with you, because God is consciousness, is a mind. And
Right.
so that's why there are things in the world that have minds.
That doesn't seem to work. So like if I say we don't know what caused pineapple, say we see a pineapple, we have no idea what caused it, and I say, well, there's just a big pineapple in the sky. That wouldn't explain pineapples, because you'd still have to explain, well, okay, what caused the pineapple in the sky? You have the same problem. Simply saying there's another one doesn't solve the
That's a
problem.
different argument. You're saying that I have to not only do I have to explain consciousness, but also I have to explain why there is a God, which is a mind. But that's a different story. We can talk about that if you want to. But it
Well,
seems
no, I know.
that
I'm saying that when you explain
when you look
consciousness,
at the question, why is there consciousness? Now, my view, as many other people, I'm not inventing anything new here. I'm telling you what the argument is, and I'm sure you know. You must have read it. There are two. Maybe there are many possibilities, but it seems to me there are two at least possibilities. One is that consciousness is some magical property that just popped into existence from matter. And the other explanation is that there is a mind, which we call God, and he created other minds. I think it's a better explanation personally, and I think it's a very plausible explanation.
that doesn't seem to explain consciousness. So let's say before God created other minds, consciousness still exists. God is conscious. What explains God's consciousness?
But as I said, if you want to talk about that, we can talk about that, but that's a different story. Now,
Well, when you say you
why
explain
does God
consciousness,
exist? It seems that many other I can give you many other arguments to explain why there must be a first cause and a creator.
well, that's
Which
not what I'm asking. I was
no,
specifically asking about consciousness. So when you say you explain consciousness, now to explain consciousness, you can't just say consciousness is there. That doesn't explain consciousness.
I'm
So
not
to
sure
say that,
we're on the same page. I'm not saying that I explain consciousness, and you have to be satisfied by my explanation that consciousness. Here is my explanation of consciousness. God. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm
how
saying.
how
What,
so so
what
if there's
we're
if there's a
talking about here is we were talking. The point was arguments, good arguments for the existence of God.
yes,
And I just give you an example. The
consciousness,
argument
yes.
that from consciousness is a good argument for the existence of God.
Well, this is the part I'm trying to understand. That does it seems like a terrible argument. It seems like the worst possible argument you can make, because you're saying that here is something we can't explain, consciousness. And in order to explain this, I'm going to posit a different consciousness. Well, you haven't solved the explanation of consciousness. All you've done is pushed it back a step and said, I'm going to posit a different consciousness. And then now you have to explain that consciousness. Well, then you can posit a new consciousness and
Why
explain
do you
that
think?
consciousness.
Why do you? I don't see why you think it's a bad. Even if that were my argument, why do you think it's a better argument? Do you think so? You personally, Tom, believe that it's a better argument to say, "Oh, consciousness, it's just when the brain becomes." I'm not saying that this is your I don't want to misrepresent your position, but it seems to me that many atheists say consciousness very easy to explain. It's an emergent property, or it's explained in terms of what the brain does, some sort of functionalism. I don't see how that is a good explanation. How does that explain it? Why? In other words, what I'm asking you is this: why are you satisfied? What satisfies you about the physical explanation that the non-physical explanation doesn't do for you? This is what I'm trying to understand.
For me, it's not about physical or non-physical. It's like an explanation is the cause of a thing. So if you say there is something, and I ask, what is the explanation of that thing? You have to list a different thing that isn't the thing to explain it, right? Like if you just list the thing itself, that's not an explanation. So if I say, what explains consciousness? And you say, a consciousness explains consciousness, that's a terrible explanation.
Explains consciousness?
Well, I think it's an emergent property. So it's a non-consciousness creates consciousness.
An emergent property. How is that better explanation than the explanation of God? It's an emergent.
If a non-conscious thing created consciousness, that would explain consciousness, right?
But the problem with that explanation is that it's got so many. I mean, this is a. If we get into any of these arguments, it's going to take days. We're going to be here for a week. But
I'm just making a really simple.
I don't know if you have in mind something along the lines of functionalism. I don't know if you. I'm sure you know what functionalism is.
I'm not making any claims that complicated. I'm a very simple claim here. If there is consciousness,
something in mind along the lines of functionalism, there are so many problems.
No, stop. Ignore functionalism. If something that was non-conscious created consciousness, and we could prove this, would that explain consciousness?
Well, it depends. What do you mean by explaining? What kind of explanation do you what do you mean by explanation? What are you looking for as an explanation? For example, if I say why it's raining, okay, I can give you an explanation. Okay, the temperature, when the temperature drops and so on, and the particles of water and all that explanation, that explains, oh, I see why it rains. All right, fine. But to say that consciousness is an emergent property, I don't see how you have an advantage in explaining consciousness. Now, if I say, well, God created consciousness, how do I explain consciousness? I don't explain consciousness. I don't know which way you want me to explain consciousness. All I'm saying is it's very plausible. And the worldview, a worldview where God is the creator of consciousness, seems to make sense, because consciousness is a very mysterious a thing. It's not a physical thing. It's not caused by matter. Consequently, it's a good explanation of, and it points in a direction of the existence of God.
Okay,
now,
so
frustrated.
You're going way too far down the argument. So let me just try to break it down into just basic variables for you. If I say I want to explain X, and to explain X, I posit an entity that has the property X, does that explain X?
Well, it depends on how. It depends on what.
I want to explain water.
Listen, let me answer your question. It depends on what would satisfy your thirst for explanation. There are certain things.
Let me give you an example.
there are certain things in life, as you know, that we will never get an explanation, a complete, clear explanation of why certain phenomena occur the way they occur. So it depends on what kind of explanation you want.
Let me give you an example.
You are welcome to go on in your life and believe that consciousness is explained well, very well, by saying it's an emergent property.
That's not my argument. You keep going off on this not my argument stuff. If I want to explain water and I say Bob has water, Bob explains water. Does that explain water?
Well, in that particular example, no, it wouldn't explain it well. It would be an explanation, though. Maybe not a good explanation, but would be an explanation.
Wait. How? This is the part I'm struggling with. So if I'm trying to explain water and I posit there's an entity Bob and he has water. Now I haven't done anything to explain water because Bob has water. I've done zero to explain the water Bob has. I tried to explain the water over here, but I haven't explained water. I've explained no explanation of water because Bob still has water. So I can't explain water if Bob still has water. Positing Bob doesn't explain water. So in order to explain a thing, you have to posit something without that thing that created that thing. So if you're saying that consciousness exists, and to explain consciousness, you're going to posit a different consciousness. You haven't explained consciousness.
Explain what I was saying was not that I want to explain consciousness. I want to explain the existence of consciousness. And I said that the existence of God, I think, is best explains why human beings that are made of matter are conscious. That's the argument from consciousness. I don't think I invented that argument. It's an argument you know it's in the literature. I find it persuasive. You don't find it persuasive. That's what the bottom line is. Now, if you say to me, I think it's a bad argument, it's a bad explanation, that's fine. I don't think
it's provably a bad explanation. I think we can prove it's a bad explanation. It's a composition division fallacy. So if I say, let's say there's a pineapple, and I want to say, I can't explain what caused the pineapple. Is it rational to say that the foundation of the universe has essence of pineapple? No, that would be silly. If I say, look, there's a star over there. What explains stars? I don't know. Well, let's say the essence of the universe has stars. Is that rational? No. All of the things that we see in the world, it is far more rational to say that they are combinations of pre-existing stuff that is emergent than to say that they are essence of the fundamental nature of reality. There is zero evidence, zero rational relation to say that because we experience something, it must be essence of the fundamental nature of reality. It is never justified to say that. To say it's an emergent property is very justified because we have lots of inductive evidence of emergent properties. We have lots of evidence that when we mess with the brain, we get consciousness. We have lots of inductive reasons to conclude that consciousness is an emergent property. Do we know how? Nope, don't know how. But there is zero rational justification to say that because we experience something, it is therefore a fundamental part of the essence of the true nature of reality. Like, no, that is as irrational as saying there is a pineapple. In order to explain the pineapple, we need to say that pineapple is a part of the fundamental nature of reality. No, we don't.
All right. It seems to me that the bottom line is that you accept the naturalistic explanation, according to which consciousness is just an emergent property. I don't know if this is your position, but I take it that you believe that as human beings evolve and animals, non-human animals evolved, they reached at one point a level of complexity such that then consciousness arises out of this level of complexity. Would that be your position?
I'm making a simpler argument here that there are two possibilities. Either once consciousness was created at some point, or consciousness was not created and is fundamental. Those are the two possibilities. And I'm saying that the idea that consciousness was created at some point is a non-fundamental entity. is more rational than to say it's a fundamental entity, regardless of which particular version of it being how it was created. So it doesn't matter which particular theory you want to adopt. What matters is that if you want to explain consciousness, simply saying that it was a fundamental nature of reality is always going to be a worse explanation than saying something created it at some point, even if we don't know how.
I'm not sure why you're making this point. My point is that your position is that nature can explain the bottom line. Nature can explain consciousness.
That's not my position.
But what is your
My argument is that there are two possibilities. Either consciousness was not ever created. It is a fundamental part of reality. So it's uncreated, or consciousness was created. So there was some point where there was zero consciousness, and then there was some point where it was. I don't know. I don't care at this point. So the argument isn't about what did it. I don't care what did.
Then how is that?
Wait. The argument here is that there are two possibilities. Either it was created or it was not created. Those are the two possibilities.
Okay.
And the inductive evidence we have indicates it was created. It does not indicate it is eternal. Therefore, it's more rational to conclude it was created, even though we don't know how. That's a better explanation than it is eternal and uncreated.
But this just begs the question. I mean, it goes back to the question of whether God exists. So you're saying, by saying that we have evidence that consciousness is not eternal, in a way you're saying we have evidence that God doesn't exist, which is the very thing that you're trying to prove. There's no evidence. I don't think you can prove. How could you possibly go about proving that consciousness is not eternal? How would you know that?
Because we have lots and lots of evidence that consciousness is related to the brain, and so we can inductively conclude the causal relationship between the two.
No, we have evidence then that where there are brains, there is consciousness. But
do we have any evidence that where there is no brains, there is consciousness? Do we have any of that?
Well, obviously not. we don't have evidence of that, because
right.
But listen, if God exists, if you assume the possibility of the existence of God, and God is eternal, then consciousness is a property of God, an eternal property of God. And once again, we don't have access to that kind of evidence. I don't see how you can prove it or disprove it either way. So as I was saying, the bottom line is that you accept naturalism. I don't.
No, I never said anything about naturalism here. So
listen,
let me give you another example.
Even if you don't mention the noun naturalism, that's what it boils down to. Either you think that nature look, Tom. Either you believe that nature explains and creates at one point consciousness, or you don't.
No, that's false. You can have consciousness. Consciousness can be emergent from supernatural forces. There could still be no God. So you don't need to say consciousness is natural. That's irrelevant to the argument here. The argument here is simply that, as you said, the only evidence we have is that if you see a brain, that's the only place we have evidence of consciousness. We don't have any evidence of consciousness existing without brains. And so if I see...
Let me understand. You are open to the
supernatural, yes.
That there is a supernatural consciousness, but it's not God.
Well, I'm open to the possibility of supernatural things which are both conscious and not conscious. So there could be a supernatural realm that is not conscious, and it could create consciousness. I'm open to both of those things, but my argument here isn't for naturalism. That's not the point. It's irrelevant. The point here is that.
But that's totally fine to me. If you want to believe that, that's fine. I think that before the best explanation to me is that of intentionality, of consciousness, mental causation, and all the mental properties that we postulate in philosophy of mind. I think that the existence of God is a very plausible and a great model to explain why matter can't think. I don't see why. If you don't believe it, you don't believe it. But I don't see why, how you could possibly say that it's a bad explanation. I don't find it to be a bad explanation.
It's a bad explanation.
Again, just to stay focused, this was just an example that I gave you.
Yes.
Toward the idea that there are so many good arguments for the existence of God, and that as you refer to as the cumulative case, and I think that there are many good arguments. Now you think you can destroy all these arguments?
Yes.
I think that's a little hard to
arrogance. Yes, but it seems very easy to demonstrate. So this argument that you presented for consciousness seems to be easily destroyed as a terrible argument, because that there's two possibilities. Either consciousness is an eternal fundamental feature.
Continue talking. I have to plug my computer because I just noticed that
running out of power.
Oh.
So the explanation is there's two possibilities. Either God or consciousness is a fundamental part of reality and is uncreated, or consciousness was created. And all of the evidence we have now is that to have consciousness requires brains. So right now, the inductive evidence seems to indicate that there is some causal relationship between consciousness and brains. It's possible that it's not. It's possible that brains are only receivers of some kind, but that's not what the evidence indicates. There's no evidence that brains or consciousness can come about in other ways. If there was, then yes, that would be good evidence that brains are just receivers, but we don't have that. So right now, we are very, very well justified, which is why it is the consensus in every field of mind that consciousness, physicalism is true, that consciousness is a product of the brain. This is the consensus in philosophy of mind. It is the consensus in neurology, is the consensus in psychology, in every single field. This is the consensus view, the Phil Surveys paper.
You really like to say this thing that it's a consensus. Once again, I don't know where you get this consensus, maybe online.
Phil Surveys paper.
You Google it, fine.
Academic polls of the actual academics.
I'm not saying this to really to say anything really bad or insulting. I work in academia, and I talk to these people all day, every day. I talk to philosophers. They're even in my experience, I have to say, even the philosophers who publish papers and they're hard defendants, supporters of physicalism and all the beautiful things that you described. Even those philosophers, when you talk to them off the records, they say, no, I can see where the problem is. I can see the possibility that God explains consciousness. I can see the possibility of dualism. And yet, again, I'm not saying, don't take this in an offensive way. And yet you don't work in academia, it seems to me. And you are so confident that the majority says this, the majority says that. I don't think it works that way.
There are polls. There are polls of academics. Yes, the academics poll academics, and that is more rational than your personal experience.
But you understand that a poll is one thing. They ask you a question, you have to give an answer. You're not going to say, oh, well, but maybe so. Now, are you a physicalist or are you a dualist? And the guy says, well, I'm a physicalist, of course.
No, and the polls include neither or both. The polls include other options.
Yes. Okay. All right. That's fine. My point is, I work in this field, and
I interviewed Julian Mussolino. He works in this field. He is an expert in this field. He has access to all the professionals. He agrees. Yes, there's no one he works with that thinks that the mind is not physicalism. The consensus of everyone he agrees with. I have all of the experts saying this, but this is different from the point. The point here is like, do we have any reason to believe fish exist in space? No. Why? Because all of the inductive evidence we have of fish is that they exist in the ocean. They swim in water. They need air to breathe. They can't exist in the ocean. All of the evidence of consciousness we have is that it requires a brain, which requires oxygen, which requires space-time. There is zero evidence that consciousness can exist as a fundamental part of reality or in space or outside of space-time, just like there's zero evidence that fish or pineapples can exist outside of space-time. And so the rational conclusion, based on all the evidence, is that consciousness is a thing that is a result of brains and space-time and those kinds of interactions, and is not a spaceless, timeless entity. That is an irrational conclusion. And so to say that your argument is that consciousness that we experience in our brains in space-time is best explained by a different consciousness that is outside of space-time and not in a brain is an irrational argument. It is a bad, terrible, terrible argument.
Well, I can only say at this point that I applaud your confidence. I don't think you're describing honestly the way it works in academia. Maybe in other fields in academia it doesn't work that way. That's not what occurs to me. I've been in this business for many years, for 30 years, and I never encountered any philosopher of mine who has that level of confidence. If you do, I'm not sure where you get it from, because I have friends, philosopher friends, who work in philosophy of mind. They are materialists. They don't have that level of confidence that you have. So that's okay. I think ultimately this argument, which is not my argument, it's an argument in the literature, just like many other arguments, are very strong, very cogent. I wouldn't say that they are really bad, like you're saying. But that's your view, and I respect it. I think that these arguments have merit. I don't think that they are bad.
From the way I see it, like if you,
by the way,
what?
No, and the consciousness argument was just an example. There
right. But I think all of the arguments have the exact same problem as the consciousness problem and the fine-tuning problem. So both of these arguments that we've gone through, I think, are demonstrably proven to be better interpreted as not indicating a consciousness. So like in the case of consciousness,
just saying that they are better explanation than other arguments, it doesn't make it true. Doesn't make it
right.
so.
That's why I was going to continue to explain why before you interrupted. So in the case of consciousness, seems more rational to conclude that consciousness is a result of brains and a result of space-time or interactions of these things. Therefore, it would be irrational to conclude that consciousness exists outside of space-time. That is not a rational conclusion of the evidence. It is a rational conclusion of the evidence to say that consciousness is determined by brains and space-time. And so the better explanation of the data is it's emergent of some kind. It is not an outside of space-time consciousness that produced our brain-based consciousness. That does not seem to be like the more rational explanation. Same with fine-tuning. It seems to be a more rational explanation that the things that we can demonstrate in physics, the quantum fields, an emergent space-time from quantum fields, which have a basis in reality and a basis in physics, are a better rational explanation than to say that there is a equally as fine-tuned God who's outside of space-time who did these things when there's no evidence of such a thing in physics. Again, it seems like both of these, and for every argument that any theist has ever presented, there is a way to explain it that indicates a better, more rational explanation under a naturalist hypothesis or a non-God hypothesis than to posit a God. And I'd say that's true for literally every one of the arguments.
Okay. I can only repeat what I just said. It seems to me that you're confusing many things: rational, irrational, proof, evidence. There's a lot to be said about those terms. I don't think we have time to do all that. I mean, it would be pointless to delve into these questions so in depth. But I can only repeat what I just said a number of times. I think you you're presenting a case which is plausible. Naturalistic explanations are plausible. Why not? But I don't see how you decide that. Therefore, the existence of a God that fine tunes a universe is irrational. I don't know where you get the that conclusion from. It doesn't really follow.
But less rational than naturalism.
Or less rational, whatever that may be. I think you have a level of confidence that I personally don't have. I don't even have. And after all these years, if I learned something as a philosopher, I learned that that level of confidence is never good. I'm not sure about these things. These are very controversial topics, and I wouldn't say that your position is completely spurious and irrational. It's possible. I just find it that a deistic rather than theistic. I'm not a theist. The deistic explanation, once you postulate the existence of a God as a mind, you have all sorts of I don't want to use that word, but I have to use it. Better explanations in terms of it fits better in with the data that we observe in the world. That is what I believe, and that's what I think the physical evidence, the scientific evidence point to.
Gotcha. We have a few questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Coffee Mom asks, can you ask what he thinks emerging properties means?
I'm not sure how I would answer that question. Emergent property is a property, a complex property that doesn't exist at bottom, but it emerges out of a certain complexity. For example, the example that we're explaining, for example, human beings, let's say one possibility is that human beings don't have a sophisticated brain, say 2-3 million years ago. And then at one point, maybe more than 2-3 million years ago, but at one point, the evolution makes the brain, causes the brain to hit a specific structure such that a property, a new property emerges from the complexity. Okay, there are many properties, emerging properties, or another example might be hardness. Okay, a table might be hard, and that some people might say that's an emergent property. That's the explanation. So I'm not sure what this person is looking for. If you,
yes, I think that was it.
You can Google it. Google is very good. But that's what an emergent property is in philosophy. Then if you have another view, I don't know.
I think that was what they were looking for. I think that was the perfect answer. Only Asking Questions asks, does he think that a person who is 95% sure consciousness is emergent would change their mind if they got one example of a non-emergent consciousness?
I'm not sure I understand this question. Does he think that that a person who is 95% sure consciousness is emergent would change their mind if I'm not sure. Maybe you can help me, Tom. I don't know how to.
Well, like if I was 95% sure God did not exist and then I met God, that would then change my confidence. I would then not be sure. So I think he's asking, like, does the level of confidence of an academic, being sure that there is consciousness or not consciousness, would they be willing to change their position if like a non-physical consciousness was proven or something?
Well, you have an example in front of you. I was not a believer of any kind And upon evidence, upon studying, I came to the conclusion that there exists a God. So I'm open to evidence. If you can show me evidence, good evidence that consciousness is completely an emergent property, or created by nature or by frogs or whatnot, I'm open to the evidence. That is the job of an honest philosopher. You don't begin with a certain worldview and then you try to find evidence to support your worldview. You rather you go where the evidence leads, and that's what happened to me in my life. That's why I wrote this book, because in a way, my book recounts my journey as a non-believer. I wouldn't say atheist, because I was always open to the possibility that there's no God, or that there might be a God. And on this journey, I came to the conclusion that there is a God. So long way to answer yes. I could be swayed either way if you present good evidence, what I think is good evidence.
Gotcha. Next question is from Paul James. He asks, what is your beef with Lawrence Krauss?
Well, Lawrence Krauss, my beef is that there are many beefs. Okay, the first one is he's an entertainer more than a physicist. He's a serious physicist. He's qualified. He's not an idiot. However, for one thing, I've watched some of his lectures and even debates, and I don't like the fact that he's very rude and very very brash, very short with some people. No patience at all. Not willingness to embrace the other side of the conversation. In this case, would be the religious side of the conversation. The other problem that I have with Krauss is that as an educator, he was totally dishonest when he published his book, A Universe from Nothing, because what the book is and what the title is are two different things. And I'm going to leave it at that. I can elaborate if you want to, but I think he was very dishonest, and that was of course that was a publishing gimmick to sell more books, I'm sure. But what he means in the book is not a universe from nothing.
I agree. I agree that he does not mean actual nothing when he says nothing. So I've also read that book, and yeah, he doesn't mean nothing. It's very confusing that
he actually means a lot, not nothing.
Yeah. All right. Only Asking Questions asks, how would he go about proving that God's consciousness is eternal?
Again, this is the question is always boils down to the idea of proof, and I think I'm not saying that people don't I don't want to say people don't understand this, because a lot of people are, especially if they are asking these questions, they do understand. But what do you mean by evidence? What do you mean by proving? Now, the only way that you can prove something like that is to use arguments. Okay, that's the best thing that we have in philosophy. Without arguments, philosophy would be a bunch of nothing. So there are many arguments, and especially one of the names that you Alexander Pras that you suggested. I have his book somewhere over here. Well, anyway. Oh, there it is, by the way. Yeah. And I would suggest reading this book. This is a very complicated book, very technical, infinity, causation, and paradox. But anyway, there are many arguments to prove inductively, to prove that God is eternal. And if God is eternal, obviously, if his property is consciousness, obviously consciousness is eternal. We can go over these arguments if you want to, but once again, nowadays the beautiful thing about these days today is that you can educate yourself. You can buy textbooks. You can go to college, or you can even Google these things, or can you go YouTube and see many people who would explain those arguments. But I think that there are very good arguments, inductive arguments, to that demonstrate that there must be a first cause of the universe, and that first cause, there are other arguments. Some of the arguments, if you care to read my recent paper that I published, I think last year on this, there's a whole section on the paper where I explain why the creator of the universe cannot be as Tom pointed out, a quantum field or an unembodied mind. It must be a mind with a mind, with an intention, with free will. That's the answer. So there are many arguments. Now, if you're asking me, oh, but you have evidence, can you prove it to me? I'm not sure that I could prove it to you. If you, by proving, you mean something like proving that this water is drinkable, I don't have that kind of proof.
Gotcha. Next question is, ask him if he would consider being a god without consciousness eternal. Can there be an eternal being without consciousness?
That's I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't think. I think that if such an entity existed, then that would be. And here, I don't want to open a can of worms, but if that such an entity, such a god, well, it wouldn't be a god without consciousness by definition. But anyway, if such an entity that has no consciousness and it's eternal existed, I don't know what that would mean, but that would be the only reality that exists. And it would be very, very hard, in my view, to explain how you go from an eternal, possibly changeless, I don't know. I mean, we don't have the specifications, but it seems to me that a consciousless, an entity without consciousness that is eternal, it would be very hard to explain how you go from this entity to a temporal world. And that's, I'm going to leave it at that. We can, this can open up a whole discussion. If you have time, we can have this discussion. And by the way, if you're genuinely interested in having a discussion with me, well, first I would suggest read my paper on this one, and second, you can contact me and we can have a discussion, and I can explain to you what the argument, the actual details of the argument, why I think it would be important to go from an entity without consciousness to a temporal world. I'll be glad to do that.
Gotcha. Next question is, if God told him that consciousness was emergent and finite, would he believe it then?
First of all, I am not a theist. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Jew. I don't believe in the God of Christianity. I don't believe that God talks to me. If that's what you think, you are on the wrong YouTube channel or the wrong show. So I personally, then, if you ask me, but do you think it's possible? It might be possible, but I don't think that God speaks to people, or that I have reasons to believe that God never spoke to people. And
But I think
so,
it's just a hypothetical. Like hypothetically, if God told you.
well, if I would have to be epistemically, as philosophers like to say, they always like to throw these big words, epistemically. I would have to be somehow sure that I am talking to God and I'm not hallucinating or some other mental condition. But why not? I mean, if you at the very least, I would be sure. There will be some evidence, but I don't know, because it's, in a way. Let me tell you, even if this is long winded, I think it's worth it. I think this question reminds me of a question, the matrix question, right? Remember the blue pill and the red pill. Now, if you take the blue pill, what was it? The blue pill that makes you see the truth, reality. I don't remember. And the red pill, you go back to sleep, and right.
I think it's the other way. I think the red pill is the one. I think the red pill is the one that
whatever.
makes you.
Oh, okay. So let's say that I take the red pill now, so in other words, Morpheus is saying to me, "Hey, listen, red pill, you discover the truth." How do I know that by taking the red pill, I discover the truth? I'm not in another layer of the matrix. So in a way, I guess that philosophically it would be the same problem if you said, "What if you hear God now, and it says, so and so, the universe, I created the universe, they exist." Would you believe that? I don't know. It's an analogous problem. How would you know that you are in the matrix? By taking the red pill. And how do you know that the red pill is really makes you see reality for what it is? So it would be some kind of really a puzzle. I don't know. It's a good question.
Carlos and Solo asks, what evidence can we look at to determine that consciousness is fundamental? Is there evidence of consciousness outside of brains?
Well, if God exists, that's an example of consciousness without a brain. Now, as I said, there are many arguments for the existence of God. I think that the very notion that God exists is a plausible worldview. If you're an atheist, obviously you might disagree with me, but I think that there's no. You might think that Descartes, reading Descartes today is silly. I don't think so. Go read Descartes and tell me why it is impossible that consciousness would exist without a body. I think that argument is still good. Still a good argument. There's no reason to believe that consciousness must be embodied in some matter.
Gotcha. Next question is from Only Asking Questions. What would convince you that God does not exist?
As I said before, first of all, I am not a theist, so I'm not a religious person. If you show me some good evidence that God doesn't exist, I don't have a invested. I have not invested my life in worshiping a deity or anything like that. So good arguments would probably make me change my mind. The same way that I studied all the arguments. So if you want to know a little bit about me, I've been studying philosophy for now going to 35 years, believe it or not. Okay, and one thing that attracted me to philosophy was precisely the existence of God, and so I've been reading and thinking about this question for many, many years. I have studied all the possible arguments, anything that was written by atheists, obviously academic papers, books, academic papers. Pretty much, I've read them all, and at one point I was okay with that, but then I also read pretty much everything that that theists wrote, and I found the theistic arguments stronger, more plausible than atheistic arguments. For example, let's say the problem of evil and God's hiddenness. What other arguments are there? So, bottom line, in my view, all the arguments for atheism are very weak, and I don't think they're very good. So, if you can present a good argument, I'll change my mind. I'm not a fundamentalist religious person who says I don't care. There are, believe it or not, there are people. I'm sure maybe on your channel you must have interviewed some of them, Tom. I don't know, but I'm sure you have people who say even in the presence confronted by any arguments, I would never relinquish. I would never abandon my faith, and I will always believe that there's God. That's not me. So
Gotcha.
give me some good evidence, and I can change my mind.
All right. Thank you for the super chat, Charles. Thank you for educating us all at 71. I think I know everything you have taught me about how I can be wrong. Thank you for the super chat. Only Asking Questions asks, what is your best argument for God?
Well, I have to tell you that I wouldn't put it that way, my best argument, but the argument that convinced me, and now I know that Tom is going to be disappointed, but the argument that really convinced me, that persuaded me, is the some form of what is known, popularly known as the Kalam cosmological argument. I published my own version of the Kalam. You can Google it, you can find it, and that to me would be the best argument. But then the second best, or probably I wouldn't say the second best, but just as strong as that argument, is the what is known in the literature as the moral argument. So, in other words, I am a moral objectivist, and I think that objective moral value exists, and I think that the best explanation for that is the existence of God. So these two are very powerful arguments that made me change my mind.
Gotcha. All right. Next question is Tim asks, how is this God different from an advanced alien?
Is this a serious question?
Yeah, because in some versions like Mormonism, God is just an advanced alien.
I see. So maybe, okay. Well, I'm not a Mormon. I think that Mormonism is probably very likely false. My view of God, and I think any plausible view of God, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think that if you had to believe in a God, I don't think you would believe in aliens. You believe that God is an eternal, transcendent being, a necessary being. Now, aliens cannot be, by the very definition of aliens, they cannot be eternal. They are created creatures. They are creatures. That's redundant. They are creatures. So I don't see how that might work. Go ahead, ask the question. I have to open the door.
All right. And next question would be from Paul James. How does Carlo define his version of God?
Oh, sorry.
No
It was
problem.
UPS live on live. That's horrible. Okay, so the question is, if I miss it, but how does Carlo define his version of God? Well, I just did. I just did. So what I argue, if you want to read my book, you can read my book. That I explain what I mean by God. But if you don't want to read the book, I'll give you the free version, which is I am not a theist. I'm not a religious person. I have reasons to believe that religions, most religions, all religions are false. For example, there's no scriptures or anything or revelations, that sort of thing, or miracles. I don't believe in those things. I have reasons to believe that they're false. So my definition of God is, as I said earlier, a transcendent being, an intelligence, okay, and this being is necessary. Now, again, if you were interested in the arguments, there are many arguments why there must be a necessary being. You can go back to Aristotle and the unmoved mover. I agree with Aristotle that there must be an unmoved mover. That would be God. That's my idea of God. However, I don't think that knowledge of God comes from revelations. I don't think that God has a special relationship with any human. I don't think that God punishes people by sending them to hell or heaven. That's pretty much my view of God.
Well, like I think he's asking about typically the properties of God: omniscient, omnibenevolence, omnipotence.
You see, in my view, for example, take the omnipotence. Okay, omnipotence is a strange property because, for example, there are things that even God cannot do. It's just impossible for God to do. For example, can God create a necessary being? Well, that would be impossible because if he creates something, well, that being is not necessary. It's created. So it would be contradictory. Can God create another God? No, that would be impossible. So the difference between my view and the, for example, the Christian view or many theistic views is that, which, by the way, I have to say, even among theists, as you know, there's a lot of discussions on the properties of God. But I am not invested in that property to defend it to the point of saying that God can do whatever he wants. For example, Rene Descartes said in the meditations that it would be impossible to have mountains without valleys. Okay, if there's a mountain, there's a valley. Okay, but then he says, believe it or not, Descartes says this, but God could do it. I don't know how. I don't think so. But I do believe that God must be powerful. How powerful? Well, powerful enough, obviously, to create the universe out of nothing and organize the universe the way we see it. What about omniscient? Well, omniscience is a very, very complicated story. I dedicate a chapter in my book about that because omniscience, there are levels of omniscience. For example, if you believe that God is exists in time, then it would seem to be impossible for God to know the future, which is a restriction on the definition of omniscience. What do I believe about omniscience? I believe that God knows a lot. On that matter, it's a complicated matter. I can change my mind, but for now, I think that God is outside time. He doesn't exist in time, and therefore, he's omniscient in that sense. But even that position has many problems. I don't think we need to go into it. So I agree with the classical attributes of God, but there's a lot to be said about it. That's what I think.
Gotcha. And the last question was, can God commit suicide? It's somewhere on there. I lost it. But does God have the ability to destroy himself?
That's one of those questions, like whether God is able to create a stone so heavy. I don't think it's possible for God to commit suicide, so to speak. Considering the fact that he's if there is a God, as I think there is, God is an unembodied mind. I don't see how you could commit suicide. Now, if you say, can the mind of God destroy itself? I don't see how he could do it. But furthermore, I don't see why he would do it. So it's a very interesting question. Why would God destroy himself? But I don't think it's possible. Now, if you respond to me, if you say, well, you see, then God is not omnipotent, that doesn't bother me. That's
Gotcha.
okay.
All right. So we've been going for about 2.5 hours. Really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation.
2.5 hours.
Yeah. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find more about your book and your work?
Right. So my book, this is my book, Deism. The best way to find it is just Google it. If you Google my name, you get my books. A lot of the things that you will get if you Google my name are in ethics, especially animal ethics. I worked in animal ethics. The book was published by Academica Press. This book here, you can find it on Amazon. Possibly you could, if you are a student, maybe, or I hope my publisher doesn't hear me now, but possibly if you're a student or anywhere involved in education, you work for an educational institution, you could possibly email the publisher and ask for a review copy, if you don't want to pay the money. I shouldn't say that because it's money that I earned. But anyway, it's easily found online everywhere. I think that there's a whole chapter somewhere online. I don't remember the website. I also have a YouTube channel, but my channel is really, don't expect anything near the TJump's content, because I use my, you see, I created my YouTube channel when the pandemic broke out back a couple of years ago, and so we started teaching remotely, and I taught a lot of asynchronous classes. So I created my YouTube channel where you can find video lectures and so on. But you can find something interesting. There are some lectures on logic, Plato, those kinds of things. And these are the best ways to find more about me. And feel free to email me with serious questions, not to insult me, say you're stupid. Because I say this because I'm looking, as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at some of the messages in the chat. I don't understand it. I never understood why there are two civilized people discussing on something like this, and there are people who feel the need to insult well, typically in as it's happening today, the guest, which is me. But anyway, if you have genuine questions, you want to learn more, just feel free to email me. I'll be glad to answer all the questions.
Awesome. Thanks. I really appreciate it. Oh, it's great having you on. It was a great conversation. Love to have you back sometime. Talk about the Kalam potentially and the moral argument.
Oh, yes.
And cool. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.
Same to you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody.